My name is Tessa Hargrove. I'm 30 years old. The call came on a Thursday morning at 9:14 a.m. I was at my desk at Piedmont Regional Credit Union in Greensboro, North Carolina, where I work as a senior credit analyst. I review loan applications for a living. I assess risk. I read the fine print of financial agreements the way other people read the news. Automatically, continuously, with an eye for what the numbers are really saying underneath what someone claims they say. The man who called introduced himself as Carl Whitaker, branch manager at First Southern Bank on Elm Street. He said he was calling to conduct a guarantor confirmation on a personal loan application submitted by Victor and Diane Hargrove. He asked if I was Tessa Lynn Hargrove, date of birth March 4, 1995. I said yes. He said he was calling to confirm that I understood the terms of the guarantor agreement I had signed on February 9th, and that I was prepared to take on the liability of the loan in the event of default. I said, "Mr. Whitaker, can you tell me the loan amount?" He said, $183,000. I said, "Can you tell me the date the application was submitted?" He said, February 7th. I said, "And the guarantor's signature, can you describe the document it appears on?" He described it. I said, "Mr. Whitaker, I need you to pull that signature document and look at it very carefully. Because I was in Charlotte on February 9th at a professional conference. I have a conference badge, a hotel receipt, 3 colleagues who can confirm my presence, and a registration confirmation dated February 1st. I did not sign that document." The line was very quiet. Then Mr. Whitaker said, in the measured tone of a man who has just understood that his Thursday morning has changed shape, "Miss Hargrove, I think we need to schedule a meeting." I said, "I'll be there at noon. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story genuinely connects with you. Drop your city and the time in the comments right now. I always want to know where you're watching from." Now, let me take you back to Asheboro, North Carolina, and the morning I was 16 years old and first understood that my name had a value in my family that had nothing to do with who I was. My father, Victor Hargrove, was a residential contractor. He built custom homes, or he had built them, through most of my childhood, with the kind of workmanlike consistency that kept a business solvent without ever making it prosperous. By the time I was 16, he had 4 employees and a reputation for good work that nonetheless never quite translated into the financial stability he felt he deserved. He was a man who believed that money was always about to arrive, which meant he spent before it did and borrowed to cover the gap and refinanced to cover the borrowing, and always believed the next project was the one that would change everything. My mother, Diane, was the administrator of the household and the emotional manager of my father's instability. She was warm and capable in every direction except the one that required her to tell Victor Hargrove something he did not want to hear. She had spent 26 years married to a man who made decisions first and consulted her second, and she had learned to reorganize herself around the decisions rather than object to the process. I loved my mother. I also understood, from an early age, that she was not going to be the person who protected me from my father's financial habits. My brother Nathan was 3 years older, which put him in that position familiar to firstborn children in households with a dominant father, aligned, unquestioning, the son who absorbed the father's worldview the way a sponge absorbs the water it sits in, without thinking about whether the water was clean. Nathan worked in construction with my father for 2 years after high school. By the time I was in college, Nathan was my father's de facto second-in-command, and they operated with the easy shorthand of 2 people who had decided the world worked a certain way and had stopped questioning it. I was the different one. Not different in a dramatic way, different in the specific way of a person who grew up watching money be mismanaged and decided, quietly and without anyone asking her to, that she was going to understand how money actually worked. I opened my first savings account at 14 with $200 from birthday money and kept a handwritten ledger of every deposit and withdrawal. I took an economics elective at 16 that nobody else in my class voluntarily enrolled in. I studied finance at UNC Greensboro because it was the specific language of the thing I had been watching my entire childhood without having the vocabulary for it. I graduated at 22 and went directly into banking, credit analysis, loan underwriting, risk assessment. The work of looking at what people claim they can do financially and determining whether the numbers support the claim. I was good at it. I was good at it because I had grown up inside a case study. Let me tell you about the moment I was 16 and first understood what my name was worth to my father. I had gotten my first part-time job, cashier at a grocery store on South Fayetteville Street, $8.25 an hour, 12 hours a week. I had been saving for 3 months, and had $290 in my savings account. My father came to me on a Saturday morning with what he described as a temporary problem and a simple solution. A supplier was owed $400 and the business account was short until Friday. Could Tessa loan her father $300 for 4 days? He would pay it back Friday, definitely. He said it with the ease of a man who had never once considered that the question was not appropriate. I lent him the $300. Friday came. He did not pay it back. The following Friday I asked. He said, "Oh right, I'll get you that. Next week." Next week became the week after. The week after became a month. I stopped asking at month 3 because I was 16, and he was my father, and the machinery of family obligation in our house ran on not pushing. I wrote it in my ledger though. In the column I labeled exactly what it was. Owed, V. Hargrove, $300. It was the first entry in what became, over the next 14 years, a detailed record of the ways my father had found to place his financial needs inside my financial life. The amounts grew. The methods became more sophisticated. But the structure was always the same. A need he had, a resource I had, an appeal to family that made refusal feel like betrayal, and then a silence about repayment that was so consistent it had to be intentional. By the time I was 24 and working at Piedmont Regional, the ledger had 11 entries. The total across them was $14,200. None of it had been repaid. I had not taken legal action. I had confronted my father twice, once at 21, once at 23, and both times the conversation had ended with my mother in tears and my father explaining that cash flow was temporary and family didn't charge interest, and I should understand that what he had built was going to be worth something someday, and why was I making this harder than it needed to be? I had stopped confronting. I had kept the ledger. What I had not anticipated, what I had not added to my risk assessment of my own family, was that my father would find a way to use my name without asking me. Let me be precise about the loan. In February of the year I was 29, my father applied to First Southern Bank on Elm Street in Ashboro for a personal loan of $183,000. The stated purpose was business working capital, a bridge loan to cover his construction company during a gap between project completions. He had tried 3 other lenders first and been declined at all 3. His credit score was 588. His debt-to-income ratio was not approvable on his own. He needed a guarantor, someone whose credit and income would make the loan viable. His credit, combined with a guarantor with a strong profile, would clear the threshold. My credit score at that time was 791. My income, verified by my employer, was $74,000 annually. I had no outstanding debt except a mortgage on a small house I had bought in Greensboro at 27. A 15-year fixed-rate mortgage with an excellent rate I had qualified for independently. I was, on paper, exactly the guarantor my father needed. There was only one problem with making me his guarantor. I would have said no. He knew I would have said no. I had said no to things smaller than this. I had kept a ledger he didn't know existed. I had confronted him twice about $14,200 he had never repaid. He knew, with the specific knowledge that parents have of their children, that Tessa Hargrove was not going to agree to guarantee a $183,000 loan for a man whose financial behavior she had been documenting since she was 16. So he did not ask. What he did instead, what I would discover in the noon meeting with Carl Whitaker at First Southern Bank, was use a document. My parents had asked me, 6 months earlier, to sign a family financial power of attorney. They had framed it as estate planning. They were getting older, they said. They needed someone responsible in place in case of emergency. It was just paperwork. Everyone did it eventually. My father had presented it at a Sunday dinner in August with a notary present. I had read the document. It appeared to be a standard limited financial POA for emergency medical and estate-related decisions only. I had signed it. My mother witnessed it. The notary certified it. What my father had done, which I discovered in Carl Whitaker's office at noon on that Thursday, was present a modified version of that document to First Southern Bank, a version with an additional paragraph that extended the POA to include the authority to execute financial agreements on my behalf, including loan guarantor agreements. The additional paragraph had not been in the document I signed. The signature was mine, the paragraph was not. Carl Whitaker spread the document on his desk. He pointed to the guarantor section. He pointed to my signature at the bottom of the modified version. He said, "I want to be very clear, Miss Hargrove, our standard protocol is a phone confirmation with the guarantor, which is why I called this morning. This is not standard practice at all banks. We do it because guarantor fraud is a real exposure, and we protect ourselves against it. He paused. I'm glad we do. I looked at the document. I have reviewed thousands of loan documents in my career. I know what a modification looks like. The very slight variation in font weight, the paragraph spacing that doesn't quite match the rest of the page, the margin alignment that is 2 millimeters off from the surrounding text. I looked at the paragraph in question. I said, Mr. Whitaker, this paragraph was added after the original document was signed. He said, that is my assessment as well. Our fraud team will need to confirm through forensic document analysis. I said, you'll have a fraud team involved? He said, Miss Hargrove, what you are describing is document fraud in connection with a bank loan application. Yes, we will have a fraud team involved. He looked at me carefully. I want to ask you directly, are you intending to pursue this? I thought about the ledger. I thought about the $14,200 and the 11 entries and the 2 conversations that went nowhere and the $300 from when I was 16. I thought about the modified paragraph and my signature underneath words I had never agreed to. I said, Mr. Whitaker, I'm a senior credit analyst. I have spent 7 years assessing financial risk. I paused. Yes, I'm pursuing this. He held the loan application pending the fraud investigation. The application was flagged in First Southern's system. My father received no funds. Let me tell you who I called first. My best friend and the person I trust most in the world is Jess Colby, 31 years old, a paralegal at a civil litigation firm in Greensboro who has the specific combination of legal knowledge and personal loyalty that makes her the right call in exactly this kind of situation. I called her from the First Southern parking lot at 1:17 p.m. on the Thursday. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which was characteristic. When I finished, she said, Tessa, the document modification, that's forgery. I said, I know. She said, and the underlying POA he used, your signature is real but the paragraph isn't. That's fraud on the bank and fraud against you. I said, I know that too. She said, do you want me to call Philip? Philip Dane was the attorney at Jess's firm who handled financial fraud cases. 44 years old, methodical, the kind of lawyer who spoke in precise short sentences and never made a claim he couldn't document. Jess had mentioned him to me twice before in the context of my father's financial history. I had always said not yet. I said, yes, call Philip. I met with Philip Dane the following Monday morning. I brought the ledger. I brought every document I had kept across 14 years. The $300 entry from when I was 16, the 10 entries after it, the original POA I had signed in August, a photograph I had taken of the original document on the day I signed it, which I had taken out of professional habit because I photographed every significant document before it left my hands, and the modified version from Carl Whitaker's file, which First Southern had provided me a copy of as part of the fraud investigation process. Philip Dane looked at my photograph of the original POA. He looked at the modified version. He set them side by side. He said, the paragraph is added. The font is close, but not identical. The kerning is slightly tighter. The margin indent on the left side is 3 millimeters narrower than the rest of the document. Someone with moderate technical skill did this. He looked up. Do you know if your father has access to document editing software? I said, he uses a computer for estimates and contracts. He's reasonably proficient. Philip nodded. The fraud investigation at First Southern will generate its own forensic analysis. Our role is to protect your interests in parallel, both on the fraudulent guarantor agreement and on the existing $14,200 in documented loans. He looked at the ledger. This ledger, when did you start it? I said, age 16, the first entry is 2011. He said, and the entries are dated, itemized, and in chronological order. I said, yes, I'm a credit analyst. I document things. He said, good. That's very good. He closed the ledger carefully. Tessa, your father committed fraud against you and against a federal banking institution. Those are not the same charge, and they carry different consequences. I want you to think carefully about what outcome you want before we decide how to proceed. I said, I've been thinking about it since Thursday. He said, and? I said, I want 3 things. I want the fraudulent guarantor agreement invalidated permanently. I want the $14,200 recovered. And I want my parents to understand completely, without the ability to revise it, what they did. Philip was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the first 2 are legal outcomes I can achieve. The third one, he looked at me steadily. That one is up to them. Let me pause here and ask you something, because I need to know what you would have done. If your father had forged a document to attach your name to a $183,000 loan, if he had used a real signature of yours on a document he had modified without your knowledge, would you have gone to the bank and let the fraud investigation run? Or would you have gone to your father first and given him the chance to undo it before the institution got involved? I have thought about this for a long time, and I know what I did, but I want to know what you would have chosen. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. I did not go to my father first. I went to the bank. I went to Philip. I let the process run. I want to be honest about why. Because I had gone to my father first, twice, about money he had taken from me across years of smaller violations, and both times, the result had been my mother crying and my father explaining, and nothing changing. I did not believe that going to my father first about document fraud would produce a different result. I believed the only thing that would make this real to my father was an institution, a bank, a fraud investigator, an attorney, saying the word forgery in a room he could not manage the way he managed his kitchen table. I was right. And I was also, in ways I did not entirely expect, wrong about what it would cost. First Southern Bank's fraud team completed their forensic document analysis in 11 days. The finding was unambiguous. The guarantor paragraph had been added to the POA document after the original signing, using a different instance of the same word processing software, with a font substitution that was close but not identical to the original. The analysis identified specific technical markers in the digital metadata of the modified file that placed its creation 4 months after the original document's creation date. The loan application was permanently declined. The file was referred to the Randolph County District Attorney's Office. My father was contacted by the DA's office on a Tuesday morning. I know the exact time because Nathan called me at 11:43 a.m. the same day. Nathan's voice had the quality of someone who has just received information that has reorganized his understanding of the last several months. He said, "Tessa, a detective called Dad this morning." I said, "I know." He said, "What did you do?" I said, "I told the truth, Nathan." To the bank manager who called to confirm my guarantor's signature on a document I never agreed to. Silence. "Did you know?" I said. A longer silence. "Did you know what he was going to do with my name?" Nathan said, "I knew he was going to apply for the loan. I didn't know he was going to use your POA." I said, "But you knew he needed a guarantor." He said he had it handled. I said he had it handled by forging a document with my signature on it. Nathan. Another silence. Then Nathan said, "I'm sorry, Tessa." I said, "I need you to think about whether sorry is what this requires, or whether something more active is required." He said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means if you knew the loan was happening and you didn't ask how he was going to guarantee it with a 588 credit score, then you were comfortable not knowing. And comfortable not knowing has a cost that I've been paying for 14 years in this family." I said it without anger, just plainly. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "You've been keeping records." It wasn't a question. I said, "Since I was 16, my father came to my house on a Thursday evening 4 days later, unannounced, which was characteristic. I saw his truck in the driveway from my kitchen window, and I opened the door before he knocked, because I had been expecting this, and I did not want the knock. The knock would have put me in the position of deciding whether to let him in, and I had already decided. I let him in, I made coffee, we sat at my kitchen table. He looked older than he had the last time I'd seen him. Not dramatically, the specific way people look older when they have been sitting inside something heavy for several days, and the weight is showing in their face. He said, "I need to tell you what happened." I said, "I know what happened. The forensic analysis is complete." He said, I need to tell you why." I said, "Okay." He said, "The 3 banks that turned me down, the business is in a bad place. Tessa, worse than I've let on to anyone. I owe suppliers $67,000. I have one active project and it's running behind schedule. I was going to lose the company if I didn't get this loan." I said, "So you forged a document with my signature." He said, "I told myself the POA gave me the authority. I told myself I was just using what you'd already given me." I said, "You told yourself a story that made it not theft. That's different from it not being theft." He looked at his coffee. "I know that now." I said, "You knew it then. You've known. Every time you took something from this family that wasn't yours to take, that you were taking it. You just found a way to call it something else." He didn't argue. That was the first time in 30 years that my father didn't argue when I named what he had done. He sat in the naming. "I'm facing criminal charges," he said. I said, "Yes." He said, "Philip Dane is your attorney?" I said, Yes, he said. Is there a way to? I said, the bank fraud is a matter for the DA, not for me. I can't make that go away and I wouldn't if I could. He nodded. The personal loans, he said. The $14,200. I said, Philip is filing a civil claim. He said, I don't have $14,200. I said, I know, Dad, you've never had it. That's why it's still in my ledger. He looked up. His eyes were red. How long have you been keeping a ledger? I said. Since I was 16. The first entry is $300. You borrowed it for a supplier and paid me back 4 days later. I paused. That was the only one you ever paid back. He pressed his hand over his mouth. He sat like that for a long time. Then he said, I did this to you. Not a question. Every time I needed something, I came to you because you were the responsible one. Because you would figure it out. Because you wouldn't make it a big deal. He looked at me. I took advantage of the best thing about you. I said, yes. He said, I'm sorry, Tessa. I know that's not enough. I said, it's not enough. But it's the beginning of something if you mean it. He said, I mean it. I said, then show me. The way you show me will tell me more than the apology does. My mother came the following Saturday. She came alone, without calling, the way my mother came to things she had finally decided to come to, without waiting for my father to organize her arrival. She had a casserole dish, the chicken and rice she had made my entire childhood when someone needed comfort, which told me she had been sitting with this for a week and had decided that showing up was the only thing left to do. I let her in. I put the casserole in the refrigerator. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee and she said, I signed the document. I said, I know. She said, the original one, in August. I witnessed your signature. I said, yes. She said, he told me about the modification in January. He showed me what he was going to do with it. I said, it wasn't right. He said it was just paperwork. It was just making the loan possible. It was temporary, he'd tell you after. She looked at her hands. I said it wasn't right. And then I didn't do anything else. I said, you could have called me. She said yes. I said, you could have warned me. She said yes. I said, you've been able to do those things every time he took something from me across my entire life. And you didn't do them. She was crying. Not the managed kind, the genuine kind that comes when you have finally said the thing you have been not saying for a very long time. I know, she said. I know I could have. I never did, and I've been asking myself all week why I never did. I waited, she said, because he was always going to do what he was going to do, and I told myself that my saying something wouldn't change it, that the only thing my saying something would do was make things worse. She looked up, but that was a lie I told myself because it was easier. The truth is, I was afraid of him, not physically, of his anger, of his disappointment, of the way the house felt when he was unhappy. I chose the peace of the house over what was right for you. She said it specifically, without softening. That was wrong. I've been wrong about it for 30 years, and I'm telling you that now because I am not willing to keep being wrong about it. I looked at my mother, 30 years old, sitting at my own kitchen table, watching her do the things she had not done once in my childhood. Choose me over the peace of a room. Thank you, I said, for saying it specifically. She said, is that enough? I said, it's the beginning of enough. The rest depends on what comes after today. She nodded. She understood. Let me tell you about Grandma Dorothy, because she is the person who saw all of it first, and she needs to be in this story. My grandmother on my father's side was Dorothy Hargrove, 76 years old, Salem, North Carolina, a retired bank teller who had worked at First National Bank of Salem for 31 years and who understood the mechanics of lending and borrowing with the particular clarity of someone who had spent 3 decades watching people make decisions about money and live inside the consequences. She called me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. She had been calling every Sunday evening since I was 19 and had mentioned to her at a family Christmas that I was studying finance. She said, good, someone in this family should understand it. She meant my father. She did not say that directly, but I understood what she meant and filed it accordingly. Grandma Dot had called me 2 weeks before the Carl Whitaker call. Not about the loan. She didn't know about the loan yet. She called because she had a feeling, which was what she called her 76-year-old's intuition about her son's financial behavior. She said, Tessa, your father is in trouble again. I don't know the specifics, but I can tell. He gets a particular voice when the money is bad. I said, I know, Grandma. She said, I want to tell you something. I said, okay. She said, I have set something aside for you. It has been with my attorney, a man named Philip Dane, on Battleground Avenue in Greensboro, for 3 years. I said, Philip Dane? She said, do you know him? I said, he came up recently, in a different context. She said, he's thorough. I chose him because he's thorough. She paused. I want you to know that whatever your father does, you have something that is yours and only yours, and he cannot reach it. I have made sure of that. I said, Grandma, what did you do? She said, I've been watching your father borrow from his family for 40 years, Tessa. He borrowed from me 8 times. I stopped loaning at 55 when I did the math and realized I had given him $31,000 in 20 years and received back $4,200. I was quiet. I kept the record, she said. I always kept the record. I knew you kept one too. I could tell from the questions you asked. I want you to know the record was kept before you were old enough to keep it. You were never imagining it. She said it simply, in the voice she used when she was stating something that was true, and had always been true, and was now being said out loud because the time had come for it. Whatever happens, she said, come see Philip Dane. He has a folder with your name on it. I had made an appointment with Philip Dane about my father's loan fraud before I realized my grandmother had also sent me to him. When I walked into his office on that Monday morning and said Dorothy Hargrove had referred me, he looked up and said, she said you'd come eventually. She said you'd come because of your father. He opened a second file on his desk beside mine. She prepared for this 3 years ago. The folder Dorothy Hargrove had left with Philip Dane contained a trust, $47,000, funded over 8 years from her personal savings, set aside specifically and exclusively for Tessa Lynn Hargrove. The trust document included a letter. Philip read it to me the way estate letters get read, carefully, as if the words have weight, and the weight must be honored. Tessa, I am your grandmother, and I have watched your father my entire adult life. I know what he has taken from the people who loved him. I know what he took from me, and I know, because I have been paying attention, what he has taken from you. I am leaving this money because I want you to have something that began before he could get to it. This is not about him. This is about you. You are the one who kept the record. You are the one who understood the numbers. You are the one who chose the hard, true work of knowing what is real over the easier work of pretending. That has cost you in this family. I have watched it cost you. Consider this the beginning of a repayment that your father should have made and didn't. The rest is yours to build. I love you. I am proud of you. I always have been. Grandma. I sat in Philip Dane's office for a while after he finished reading. He brought me water. I held the glass and thought about Dorothy Hargrove at her kitchen table in Salem, making a decision 3 years ago, carefully and without telling anyone, to set aside what she could in the time she had to set it aside. I thought about 31 years behind a bank teller window, and the math she had done at 55, and the $31,000 and the $4,200 repaid. I thought about the Sunday evening calls, and the good, someone in this family should understand it, and the particular quality of attention she had always given me, the attention of someone who was keeping a record of the right things and making sure they were preserved. I said, she's still alive. Philip said, yes. She wanted you to have the letter now. She said she didn't want to wait. I said, can I call her? He said, I think she's expecting it. I called Grandma from the parking lot of Philip's office at 11:42 a.m. on a Monday. She answered on the second ring. I said, I read the letter. She said, I know. I said, you've been watching this for 40 years. She said, since before you were born. Your father has always been this way. I tried to correct it when he was young, and I didn't succeed, and I have been sorry about that ever since. I said, you kept the record. She said, I kept the record, and I made sure it was somewhere he couldn't reach. I said, Grandma. She said, yes. I said, thank you. She said, you don't thank family for doing what's right, Tessa. You just show up on Sunday and have coffee. I said, I'll be there this Sunday. She said, I'll have the good cups out. The criminal matter, the Randolph County DA's office reviewed the first Southern fraud investigation findings and issued a charging decision in April. 1 count of forgery in the first degree, 1 count of obtaining property by false pretenses. My father retained a criminal defense attorney. The case is in process. I am not the complainant in the criminal matter, the bank is. I have provided a statement. The outcome is not mine to determine. The civil matter, Philip Dane filed a civil claim for recovery of $14,200 in documented loans plus interest, totaling $19,847. My father did not contest the claim. His attorney submitted a consent judgment, An agreement that the debt is valid and will be repaid through a structured settlement drawn from whatever he recovers from the sale of equipment and vehicles when the business is wound down. Bowman's Supply, my father's company, closed in March. It was not a surprise. The $183,000 loan would have kept it alive for another year, maybe 2. Without it, the existing debts caught up. 4 employees were let go. My father is working as a subcontractor for another builder, hourly, no overhead. He is 57 years old and starting something that looks different from what he had built and lost, and I have chosen, with difficulty and intention, not to spend too much energy on how that feels. Let me tell you where everyone is now. Grandma Dot and I have coffee every Sunday. I drive to Salem, 47 minutes from Greensboro, which is nothing. She makes the good coffee, the kind she has always made, strong and dark and without apology. We sit on her back porch, and she tells me about her garden and I tell her about my cases, and neither of us talks about my father unless we need to, which is increasingly rarely. She is 76 and entirely herself, and I am making sure I have as many of these Sundays as there are to have. The $47,000 trust is in a high-yield savings account in my name. I have not spent any of it. I am not sure yet what it is for. I am letting it be what it is for a while. The record of my grandmother's love, made tangible and portable, and his proof. I will know what to use it for when I know. Philip Dane offered me a referral. Not as a client, as a professional contact. A financial institution that does complex forensic document review on loan fraud cases needs a consulting analyst. Philip mentioned my name. I have had 2 conversations with them. The work is interesting and the rate is $140 an hour. I have not said yes yet. I am letting it sit beside the trust money. 2 things that came out of the worst thing, both of which are mine and only mine. My mother and I are talking every Tuesday and Thursday. She is in counseling. She mentioned this on a Wednesday call, quietly, almost as an aside, in the way she mentions things she is not sure how to claim yet. She said, I've been going to someone to talk about the things I've been not doing for 30 years. I said, how is it? She said, hard, real. I said, those are usually the same thing. She laughed, small and surprised, like a laugh she had been holding in for a while. We are building something. It is slow and it is real. And I am choosing to build it. Nathan called me on a Sunday evening 6 weeks ago. He said, I've been thinking about something you said, about being comfortable not knowing. I said, yes. He said, I was comfortable not knowing a lot of things in our family, because knowing would have required me to do something about it, and I didn't want to be in the position of doing something about Dad. I said, I know. He said, that's not an excuse. I said, no, but it's honest, and honest is where you start. He said, can I ask you something? I said, yes. He said, the $300, from when you were 16. You wrote it down? I said, first entry, March 14, 2011, $300, borrowed for supplier, V. Hargrove. He was quiet for a long time. Then, I'm sorry it took this long for anyone to see what you were carrying. I said, you're seeing it now. He said, yeah. I said, that matters, Nathan. He said, does it? I said, it's not everything, but it matters. We talked for another 40 minutes. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. I did not write it in the ledger. Some things belong in a different kind of record. My father and I have not had a dinner. We are not there yet. He calls on the first Sunday of every month. I think he chose Sunday because it was Grandma Dot's day, and he wanted to be associated with something she had built that was still standing. The calls are short, 8 to 12 minutes. He tells me about the subcontracting work. I tell him nothing personal. Not yet. At the end of the last call he said, I'm trying to figure out how to be someone different at 57 than I was at 56. I said, that's the work. He said, it's slow. I said, it's supposed to be slow. Fast wouldn't mean anything. He said, okay. I said, okay. We hung up. It was enough for a first Sunday. Here is what I want to say before I go. There is a specific kind of theft that happens inside families that is harder to prosecute than document fraud because it does not leave forensic markers in the metadata of a modified file. It is the theft of trust, the theft of the assumption of good faith. The theft that happens when someone who is supposed to protect you uses the very language of family. We're all in this together. You're the responsible one. It's just temporary. We'll sort it out. To extract something from you that they know you would not give if you understood what was being asked. I am a credit analyst. I assess risk for a living, and the most dangerous risk assessment I ever failed to make was the one I should have been running on the people I was supposed to be able to trust, without running an assessment. I should not have had to. That is the whole point. The betrayal is not that I kept a ledger. The betrayal is that I needed one. If you are the person in your family who keeps the ledger, who makes the document, takes the photograph, notes the date and the time and the exact amount, I want you to know something. You are not being paranoid. You are not being unforgiving. You are not failing to extend the benefit of the doubt. You are doing what the record requires. You are doing what your grandmother did before you were old enough to do it yourself. You are making sure that what happened can be proven. Keep the ledger. Keep the receipts. Photograph the documents before they leave your hands. Know your credit score. Know your name and what it means on a piece of paper you did not read before signing. Know that document fraud is a crime, and that bank managers call to confirm guarantor signatures for exactly this reason, and that when they call and you tell them the truth, the process will run and the truth will hold. Your name belongs to you. It belongs to no one else. Not to the family that raised you, not to the father who needed a guarantor, not to the modified paragraph in a document he thought you'd never see. It is yours. Sign it yourself, or don't sign at all. My name is Tessa Hargrove. I'm 30 years old. I'm a senior credit analyst in Greensboro, North Carolina. My father forged a document to attach my name to a $183,000 loan I never agreed to guarantee. The bank manager called to confirm. He got me, and I had the conference badge and the hotel receipt and the photograph of the original document. And 14 years of a ledger that started with $300 on March 14, 2011. He got more than he expected. So did my father. Thank you for staying until the very end. If someone has ever used your name, your credit, your signature, your trust, without asking you first, drop a comment. Tell me what the document said. I read every single one. Share this with the person in your life who needs to hear that their name belongs to them. Only them, and that the bank manager will call. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.